Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start in 1 minute. In 1 minute. Since I said 1 minute, now everybody's quiet. Are we good? All right. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am Senator Joe Major, and I'm honored to serve as your moderator tonight for this educational forum for the people of Windsor County. We've brought together a strong and knowledgeable group of leaders, legislators, superintendents, school board members, and Vermont's Secretary of Education to have an open and honest discussion about the future of education in our state. The panelists are joined us via Zoom, our Secretary of Education, Zoe Saunders, from South Burlington, Vice Chair of the Senate Finance Committee, Thomas Chittenden, school board member, former school board member here in Hartford, and Representative Kevin Christie. And here in the auditorium, we have former Secretary of Education and Representative from Norwich, Rebecca Holcomb, Representative Esme Cole, Senator Becca White, Hartford School Board Chair Nancy Russell, and Superintendents Katie Sutton, Catherine Bourne, and Sherry Souza. Tonight's forum is about clarity, transparency, and engagement. There's been a lot of discussion and at times misinformation about the process of transforming Vermont's education system. Our goal is to provide accurate information, shared where things stand, and most importantly, give you, the community, an opportunity to ask questions and be a part of the conversation. We care deeply about our schools, our students, and our communities. This is your chance to hear directly from those involved and to better understand our path forward. Thank you for being here and for taking time to engage. Let's begin. First, I'd like to go to Senator Chittenden. There's been a growing concern across Windsor County that Vermont's S220 may have been disproportionately impacting our local schools compared to other regions of the state. Can you help us understand how the funding and policy changes in the bill are evaluated for the regional equity, and what steps, if any, are being considered to ensure that communities like ours are not unfairly burdened as these reforms move forward?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay, Senator Major?
Yes.
Great. Well, first of all, thank you for having me tonight. I really appreciate speaking first as well, and I hope Secretary Saunders corrects anything I say, as well as all of your other esteemed panelists. So S220, as to speak directly to that question, is a bill that, if you look at a process for a bill to become law, has taken two of about 8 steps. It is very early in the process, as much as we are halfway through the session. All it has done so far is left committee and also passed second reading. It's up for third reading tomorrow. And for those that are familiar with the process, know that this is an evolutionary discussion. I also want to just highlight that S220 was amended greatly by your Senate Finance Committee. So earlier coverage of S220 as it first came, introduced into the legislature, had what was called hard caps using allowable spending growth caps. That the amended bill that left committee that was voted on this past Friday does not use hard caps. It uses a tool that is familiar to all of our school districts. And for those of you very familiar following this, you would not be surprised when it is just changing the excess spending threshold that is in current law. This is a tool that has been in place. It actually has had two different iterations, in a way more than that. But it first came into effect back in 2016 after Act 46, or part of Act 46, as a construct that was then changed to away from a hard spending cap towards an excess spending threshold, which would effectively address what I would see in our education system across the state as a high degree of variance. We see districts based on the will of the local voters agreeing to differing spending levels, translating to different educational opportunities. Those educational opportunities varying across district is what inspired the Brigham decision in many regards about 30 or 40 years ago. So a lot of people looking at our system today are seeing similar inequities. The excess spending threshold that has been in place in really two different forms, going back to 2016, was an attempt to start to bring in less or reduce the variation in spending per pupil across our 119 districts. So it was a tool that school districts were familiar with during the prior to Act 127, which is when we changed to pupil weights away from equalized pupils. We had it employed from my understanding 2017 until about 2022 when we suspended it while we shifted the formula going over to these pupil weightings away from equalized pupils. And I can elaborate on that if you so desire. Then in 2024, with the new formula, the new weights, we reinstituted it. So it was suspended, we brought it back into place, and it's been in place for I believe, the last 2 fiscal years at 118%. This is where I'd usually love a PowerPoint in front of me in order to walk through the visuals, but I don't think we have that coordinated in advance. I'd be happy to provide additional materials afterwards. But the point that I want to summarize or bring this, it's a long answer to your question, Senator Major, but since it is, I think, relevant and very topical in the legislature, now let me tell you what is in the amendment of S220. It's really 5 things. One is we lower that excess spending threshold penalty from 118% of prior year spending adjusted for inflation to 112%. This is a number that should be determined in a variety, in my argument, every year based on the variance we see across districts. And I would also argue it should be tied somewhat to the deviations or the standard deviations of variance across the districts, or using other ways to identify outliers. Regardless, we are proposing at 112%. I want to just also preface this by saying there is no one magic number. This is part of the legislative process to look at the impacts, the regional impacts to which your question alluded to. And as this has been very fast moving, this is just one part halfway through the process of 8 steps, the second step of 8, where this is going to be continued to be discussed. But before I stop talking, let me just add 4 other pieces of this bill that are really important to put in context to this, what is proposed in the amendment. So one, it is to lower the excess spending threshold in order to incentivize districts to come more towards the average or bring them down to reduce the variance. So they would be motivated, but not required, to spend more comparable to the peer districts across the state. And if they don't, then it would incur what's already in law today, a double tax on dollars above this threshold. But that has implications, and you mentioned them that they can be rather regionally specific. So the bill does 4 other things in addition to contemplating a lowering of this threshold. The first is very important, especially to the Windsor district. It proposes to eliminate, or to not eliminate, that's the wrong word, to exclude from the calculation all voter-approved debt. Current law, what is in law today, us doing nothing, does not include any debt approved prior to January 1st, 2024. But I believe 2 districts in Windsor have since approved debt that are currently being considered in the excess spending threshold calculation. This bill would exclude those from those excess spending threshold calculations for each of those districts, which I believe is Windsor, and then I have the other one in my email I can bring up. So that's the first of 4 things it does. One, it would exclude both all debt approved by voters since 2024, as well as any future debt approved, for the same reasons that we currently exclude all debt prior to January 1st, 2024. Those are important investments that we need to put into our communities that are spread over the life of the asset, and so they shouldn't be factored into the operational budgeting considerations for what we're trying to accomplish with this threshold. The three other things S220 contemplates to do is it adds a hold harmless provision in two different ways. So it says that if a district, a currently determined to be higher spending district, if they are above the excess spending threshold with any amount, but their education spending, which is determined by their total education spend minus offsetting revenues, but if their education spend does not increase at all over prior year, or if their per pupil spending does not increase at all over prior year, they too, in that case, if you're level funding, you are finding ways to right size and to do the tough things that I know school boards are doing regularly. So those two would be excluded from the excess spending threshold, which we also saw in committee as an important thing, especially for the smaller districts that are struggling with a variety of different pupil fluctuations. The last thing S220 contemplates to do, which was an important piece for me to continue this conversation, is we in the legislature, we are doing our best, but we can't anticipate all of the unforeseen circumstances that could affect a district from being able to be under the excess spending threshold. So it adds an appeal process, which any district, based on circumstances that we're not anticipating, could put forward and make the case for not being considered in this excess spending threshold penalty of a double tax on dollars above it. This is early in the process. As for the regional implications, Senator Major, you're absolutely right, and that is part of this process. As I said, the bill started as a hard cap just the week prior to crossover. It was realized by many in the committee that for the same reasons it was previously not adopted, a hard cap, a soft cap, and looking at this soft cap made a lot of sense to continue to empower our local school districts to, if they so desire, ask the voters to spend above this, but at the same time provide some centralized budgetary guidance to try to bring our districts closer together with how much we're spending on our kids at a rate that our taxpayers across the whole state can afford, because these spending decisions are spread across the entire grand list. That was an incredibly long answer, Senator Major. I hope I answered your question. I'll stop there.
Well, I appreciate that. The other town that you were alluding to was Hartford. So I did want to go to Secretary Saunders. And once again, thank you, Secretary Saunders. I know that you're at a conference in DC, and if you had anything to add to this, I would appreciate it.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for having me. I'm sorry that I'm joining you virtually, but I am in DC at the State Chiefs Conference and meeting with our congressional delegation tomorrow. So I didn't want to miss the opportunity to come in virtually. Regarding S220, just wanted to add that this is a bridge to get to the foundation formula. So Act 73 puts forward a foundation formula to ensure that we're able to provide an equitable education across the state, and that students that have similar needs are getting similar resources, the same resources based on their needs. That's the direction that we're going, because currently our system across the state is unfair and is inequitable. And so as we shift from our current funding approach to a foundation formula, there naturally does need to be a bridge in place. That's what S220 is designed to achieve. So as this is going through committee, the agency will be called, I'm sure, to testimony to further evaluate as those additions or flexibilities are entertained to support the goals of readying our system to move to a foundation formula, which will allow us to ensure every child has access to a high quality education, no matter where they live or the wealth of their community.
Thank you. I would like to go to Representative Holcomb to get her thoughts on S220.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you all for showing up tonight. I really appreciate your interest and support for our local schools. I love coming to Hartford, and I'm impressed that there are lots of people online as well. I just really disagree. I really disagree. I mean, I think we have put our schools through the ringer. Last year, we chose to use over almost 120 million in surplus money to buy down tax rates. That's like taking the money you've been saving to insulate your house and using it to go out to dinner, and then being surprised you don't have savings the next year. What it did, and what we see, is that school boards have worked really hard to bring in reasonable budgets. School budgets are only up 4.5% this year. Department of Corrections is up 5.7%. Governor's Office of Administration up 5.5%. It's healthcare, people. We know it. And people are working really hard to keep their costs down. And what's so frustrating around S220 is, first of all, we got problems in the weights. And as my statistics professor used to say, you can't fix with analysis what you really screwed up with by design. And those weights are wrong. I actually consulted with the team of people who in our current funding formula, and they said we shouldn't be weighting tuition. And when you look at the people who are not ever going to be subject to this, it's tiny, tiny towns that are weighted as if they're operating very small schools, but aren't. They're paying tuition to some of the biggest schools in the state. And so that's wrong. And when you've got the weights wrong, and then you start putting penalties on top of the weights, guess what? You're going to punish the wrong people. And that's exactly what this is doing. You can't fix with analysis what's screwed up by design. And what's really upsetting about this in Windsor County, when I look at who's hit, is we're hitting the wrong people. We're hitting the wrong schools. This is the Pete Hegseth approach. Wait till people are down and then give them a kick. Because let me tell you who's getting hit. Blue Mountain, 72% poverty rate in that school. They're getting penalized. Rivendell, penalized. They have a 58% poverty rate. Oxbow Union Unified School District getting penalized. Two of those districts just had their long-term weighted ADM corrected last week after they put their budgets. They made terrible, terrible cuts to their programming. These are districts that can't afford to do that. And now we're going to punish them with this excess spending penalty because we can't get the weights right. That's not right. And that's not what Vermont's about. And I look at that and I compare in our own region. I'm going to throw my own district under the bus because we have a much lower poverty rate. We're exempt because it's an interstate district and you can't impose tax cuts on New Hampshire. But it's not right. Should Hartford be hit with a $1.5 million penalty when Norwich doesn't? Should Windsor Central have a $2.7 million penalty? How are they going to provide for their kids if they have to do that, even with the bond exemption? This has to be about children. And it is not about children when you create constant policy instability and then you punish people who are struggling with their property taxes by raising their property taxes even more. We need serious policy that is focused on kids and focused on improvement. And it's so telling that what we're hearing from people up on the screen is let's level down, because that's what this is. This is about leveling down and reducing what we spend. And we've seen what that did in California. And I'll be the first person to say there are places where we need to do some mergers. And we are definitely spending too much on special education because we have not made the practice shifts that were supposed to be implemented in Act 173 years ago. We have an implementation problem in the state. So I'm not saying we should stay the way we are, but when you just do hard cuts to get into a funding formula that has hard cuts, don't expect your outcomes to go up, and be really clear about who might just leave your system, because we've seen it before and there's very good evidence on that. So I totally disagree with this. I think we need to be focused on sensible policy that finds kids where they are and make sure that we're giving them good opportunities and stretching every dollar as far as it can. But random changes in existing policy for policy that's coming and isn't even decided on, I don't even know how you school boards do it, because we're changing the rules on you every 30 seconds. I don't even know what future you're planning for. So I just want to thank our school board members who are here today. Shout out to you. You're doing an amazing job. I don't believe people are raising your property taxes because they want you to spend more. I remember being at town meetings where people asked me how much we spent on pencils. You know, that's accountability, right? You don't get that accountability at the state. And you care. You're doing what you can. And yeah, we all need help. And we can do better and we will do better. But we're not going to do it overnight. And we're not going to do it by changing the rules every 20 seconds and telling people they're failing and then raising their property taxes when they can't make change fast enough. So thank you.
So So as you can see, we do have debate in Montpelier. I was amiss. If you do have questions, please come up to either microphone and we will call on you. I want to make sure that you drive this, that you drive this forum. Tim?
I'm a little scared at the mic, if you can imagine that. Tim Ferrier, White River Junction. I go back a ways. I grew up at Albert Bridge School in Brownsville, Vermont. It was a 4-room schoolhouse with incredible educators that I think launched me properly. And then I went to Windsor, which was a poor middle town that also had dedicated teachers that I think delivered an amazing education. I'm more distressed on a broader level here. I feel like in Vermont, we've created a monster. We've created this weird universe of Act 60, money, per pupil spending, Stowe, Windsor, all these like dialogues that to me are completely insane. I just think that, not oversimplifying the challenges we face, but I feel like we have lost our way in focusing on where the magic happens. And where the magic happens is with a teacher and a student and that relationship and what can happen. And we are talking about money and this and per pupil spending and healthcare and all these things. But I just think we're losing our way. We're not that big, Vermont. We can do better work. We spend way too much money. I don't think we deliver great outcomes. I think we could do much better. And I just wish that we would stop this kind of frenzy of like how much we're spending and what about this and what about that, and get back to the basics, which is the beauty of a public education system that delivers quality education and allows kids to thrive and grow. And I hope we can kind of remember that's where it came from. Because in my humble opinion, Act 60 has failed. We thought we would take Stowe and Windsor and give these, two kids the equal opportunity. It's a myth. We've blown it. And we have to step back and we have to reflect and say, where the magic happens. I don't know if you ever read a book called No Place But Here, one of the most beautiful books ever written. It's about this English teacher in the Northeast Kingdom. And he's with his students every day and he delivers a beautiful curriculum and tells his kids, you have potential. That's what it's about. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. Superintendent Bourne, since you are the Windsor superintendent, I would love for you to comment on that and comment on, you're the one with your fellow superintendents, whatever we do in Montpelier, you're the one who is going to have to execute what we do. And that is a daunting task. How do you feel about what's happening and going forward with the educational transformation?
Can I be honest?
Absolutely.
I don't think that the transformation is going to do what people think it's going to do. I think it's pitting communities against each other, starting to almost feel like it's pitting superintendents against each other, to be honest. And I agree, the magic happens at school between staff and teachers. That was beautifully put. I think we need to make the funding make sense. And so we have to explain budgets, which are really difficult to craft these days. We have costs that are out of our control. And even when our budgets are lower than they were in the previous year, our tax rates are higher. People just don't understand. And I think we all agree that there are some places where consolidation needs to happen. And I think even all the superintendents agree that. And we need a plan that makes sense to do that. And we need communities on board with that. And so I think we need to take the time to do the work to really make the right decisions going forward. This feels very rushed, and it feels like it is to the detriment of our kids and our communities. So that's my honest feeling about it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Secretary Saunders, your task is to take a 3,000-foot view of the entire state and not just one particular school district or county. When you hear things like that, how do you try to explain what your path forward and what the best path forward is for the state?
Ultimately, what we're all trying to achieve is educational equity. We want to ensure that our children in the state of Vermont have access to a world-class education. And unfortunately, the way that our system is structured is creating significant barriers. And while we've had very well-intentioned policies over the last couple of decades, it has translated into a greater disparity between the haves and the have-nots. And we've also, in addition to policies that have been implemented, our state has experienced many demographic shifts. And we need to be thinking about how we're going to achieve the goals and the promise of public education. I want to reset how we initiated this transformation, which was first to identify what are the goals for education that we hold dear. And in many cases, those goals have already been codified in law, but have not been implemented in practice consistently across the state, such as increasing access to pre-kindergarten, increasing access to career and technical education, providing wraparound support for our students, ensuring that there is mental health counseling for our students, and increasing teacher salaries. These are goals that we clearly outlined and then looked to how we could fund those goals fairly across the state of Vermont. Moving to a foundation formula allows us to do that. And I want to emphasize the foundation formula that's part of Act 73 represents the highest spending on education compared to any other state. This is a very generous amount of funding that we're investing, and we're committed to investing in the state of Vermont because we believe so strongly in public education. Districts are just the mechanism by which we're able to deliver those dollars to ensure that our dollars are getting to our students, are able to offer the array of programs, opportunities, and services that we know our students need, and can pay our teachers fairly across the state of Vermont. And so as we look to this, we are really centering all of these decisions around what's in the best interest of students, and recognizing that in order to deliver on those opportunities and experiences, we have to change the way that we're delivering education and using the significant investment and dollars for students to make sure that they're delivering on those expectations and goals for students. I think we've done a really effective job over the last couple of years of examining the problem. And there is consensus that our current system is inequitable. And there's a commitment that Vermonters share to fairness. There's a commitment that Vermonters share to quality public education. And that's what we're trying to achieve through the education transformation work. And so I think conversations like these are really important to make sure that we're all centering the work ahead and the policy choices to come around our North Star of providing the best educational experience for all students.
Thank you. Superintendent Souza, many Vermonters value local control of their schools. And moving forward, does consolidation do that? And how will small communities that fear losing their voice and identity fare?
Well, I think that Mountain Views, once Windsor Central, is a really good example of how communities came together through Act 46. We were a supervisory union. At one point in time, we had one board member for every 4 students in our supervisory union. That over-representation got in the way of good school practice, contracts, unified calendar. And I will say, as someone who sat in those 25 3-hour meetings that brought together 7 communities, it was worth every minute. As a result of merging us from a supervisory union into a district, we have a shared contract, we have shared curriculum, we have shared intentions. We have a path forward, and our students are thriving. Our scores and our outcomes from students have increased significantly in the 5-6 years since we made those hard decisions. And it was our school board members who realized that if we want all of our students to have the same experience entering middle school, that we needed to give up our individual boards to one merged district. We now have an 18-member school board. I love every member. They bring their own unique.
Every member?
Every member. And we're bringing on 2 new members. And so what is really impressive is with 18 members, when we bring 2 new members on, we create this community where they're all our students and we all succeed together. And I think that's my position, is that we need those individual board members made the courageous decision to represent students first and their communities second. And that is what I see every time we have a board meeting. I'm excited. We have one of my board members right here. They are very involved. They develop policies. They think long-term, and they advocate strongly for all of our children. So I think Mountain View is an example of how movement from a supervisory union, how governance can make a difference, and how it can really speak to the needs of individual children as opposed to the needs of adults. And I think that's what I keep hearing as being forgotten. And thank you, Secretary Holcomb. Sorry, it's hard to let go of that. Representative Holcomb, remembering students come first. And that's what I've seen. Thank you for asking.
Ma'am?
Name?
Yes.
Ann Henshaw from Chester. So as a newly appointed school board member, I have some question, well, mainly one question. We hear a lot of discussion and the word passed around, inequity. And I am a disability advocate and activist, and inequity is not a new word in my conversation with the communities that I work with. Knowing that what's happening now with Act 73 is already going to affect disproportionately our students receiving special education supports and services. I have concerns because I feel that special education has kind of become the buzzword to talk about where we can make savings, where we can make cuts. That's what I'm hearing in places. It makes me very nervous because I feel like healthcare is not being talked about as the actual driver for costs. Representative Holcomb, you mentioned something about systems that, yes, these are areas where we could make changes. Could you elaborate on what systems you would have liked to have seen? Because you seem very knowledgeable about it, and I'm really curious your take on what systems you felt could have been put in place that, as you referenced in Act 173 earlier, can you explain that more to me and help me understand where maybe they didn't fully finish putting things together as they should have to protect students? I do see the writing on the wall, and as more and more boards are having to have these discussions with communities that aren't wanting to pass their budgets, and a lot of people who may not be fully aware of all the systems that go into our special education services and supports, that's kind of where they want to see cuts being made. That makes me nervous. So if you could help kind of elaborate on
Absolutely. It should.
how to protect that, but while also, making some changes that need to happen.
So the origin of Act 173 was, and first of all, I just have to say, in the funding formula, in the inequity in the funding formula, anytime we wanted, we could raise the bar. We could just say there's a minimum amount you're allowed to spend. That's what Act 60 did. It actually set a minimum tax rate. And all of a sudden, some towns had to spend more. So what we heard earlier is let's narrow variability by lowering down what we spend. You could also just say to some of these districts that keep voting their budgets down, you actually need to spend enough to take care of your kids. I just have to say that. In terms of this origin of Act 173 was based on a series of studies that were done across the state where people went into school districts and they looked at how they were providing for children, particularly struggling learners. And what we saw is every school district said, well, we're unique. And what we were really unique in was our belief in our own uniqueness. We were all doing the same thing. And the problem is that we were overusing specialists to serve our most complicated minds. And we weren't focusing on primary first instruction. And every child, including students with disabilities, deserves the absolute best teacher who is the best prepared, most skilled diagnostician that they can have. And so the intent of Act 73 was to change how we identified students who might need an IEP, but to really and also to change how we funded so that funding could be used more flexibly, including for early intervention. But also it was supposed to include a very, very heavy focus on improving teaching. And what happened is that instructional piece didn't really happen. So we still have a situation where many students are receiving a tremendous amount of their instruction out of the classroom or away from their peers. And there's some students who need that, and it's totally appropriate, and that's what it should be. But what we see is that we are using that more than other places do. The other thing we're seeing is that we have, we send about twice as many students. We place them into what are called substantially separate settings. They're out of the schools. They're out of the classrooms. They're not with their same age peers. That's actually a violation of their civil rights. And we can't do that. That is wrong. I look at that number and I feel bad because we are violating those children's rights to a free and appropriate public education with their peers. So those are extremes and examples of some of the work we have to do that better. We need to do better work at making sure every teacher is supported and able to teach well, and also that we've got a little bit more development and robustness around that middle level of intervention that keeps people in their communities and in their schools. One of the reasons I have been a strong proponent of regional shared services is I actually don't even think the big districts called for by Act 73 are big enough to make sure that we have the right expertise sometimes on deck for the kids who need it when they need it. I'll give you an example. When I was a principal, we once had a student, very complicated traumatic brain injury, who was also a second language student. And I had to go to Massachusetts to get somebody who could come and evaluate that student and put together a service plan that would work for them. The power, and I think some of Sherry's work, and I hope you'll talk about it with the regional shared services, the BOCES model, is you're able to capture really skilled people. You can hold them regionally, and you can make them available to any school and any child when they need it. Right now, what happens is people are sort of fighting for that expertise. It gets put on board in one district, and then the next district can't find the person to do the evaluation that needs to be done. We can't work this way. And so I've been a strong proponent of the regional shared services, because instead of waiting 3 to 5 years to do the mergers that Sherry talked about so that you finally have access to skilled expertise, we could stand that up tomorrow and start experiencing the benefits next month. Our kids can't wait. They got one shot at school, and we have to do a better job. And I'm really impressed by some of the work that Sherry's group has been doing. I think it's a great model for the state. You're starting to show savings, but you're really also showing better service and better opportunities for kids. And that's super exciting. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you.
It sounds like special education is actually a service, not a place. So I'm really happy to hear your answer. Thank you so much.
Sir.
Gio Honeyford from Royalton. I spent 13 years on the school board, 10 of those on the executive committee of my SU. And I want to dovetail off something that the Mountain View superintendent brought up. I think there's very few superintendents in the state who would say the SU structure is actually a sensible structure, because who's the educational leader in those districts? Is it the principal? Is it the superintendent? And when you have an SD, a supervisory district, you know who the leader is. So it makes things much easier. We're looking at trying to save money across the state, and we're trying to combine all these schools into bigger systems. And I'm going to challenge, where's the money to be found there? If they're SDs, certainly there's money to be found. You can close schools. You have control of curriculum. You have control of staffing. You can do many things. If you combine just into bigger SUs, you haven't done anything. All you got is a bigger SU. So what we did when I was I'm from an SU, there was a neighboring SU that was in trouble. Rebecca, you know all about this. And it was pretty obvious the state was going to shut them down. we were the logical people to get them. And so instead of fighting it, we said, if these people are going to join us, we want them in. We don't want enemies in the tent. And so we come on in, and they joined us, and we became one of the biggest SUs in the state. And what did that result in? We saved no money, but we did do some things for kids. We now had the capacity to hire a curriculum coordinator and combine all technical support at the SU office, which was great for kids. We didn't save any money, but we did do that. We did also turn our superintendent into a frantic person who we never saw in the building anymore, because now they had 9 districts, not the 5 that they had before. So nothing happened there. There was other things that got in the way, things that we wanted to get accomplished. I wanted to get a facilities coordinator, someone who actually knew something about buildings, managing our buildings, combine food services, bulk purchasing together. You couldn't do that in that model because there's always one district that said, no, we like Charmin better than that single ply toilet paper. We're not going to group buy. Or we love our food people, or we like our custodian who's doubling as our building facilitator because he's a nice guy. And so you couldn't do the things that were actually going to do it because it only took one district to say no. So I guess the question I have here, and it's more geared for the superintendents, but I'm glad to hear anybody's answer on this. How is taking my SU, which now has 6 districts because some of us merged, throw us another 4 or 5 districts, still an SU, how are we going to save money? How are we going to make any changes when SDs control the situation, not SUs? Thank you.
Katie, since we haven't heard from you yet, if you have an opinion on that.
I mean, we are an SD and we function as one, and we are able to run efficiently as a result of that, to have one board, 5 members. I'm the superintendent. We have, all of our buildings that are under, one set of eyes in terms of facilities. We're able to coordinate those services across the SD. So my experience has been this and this alone. And I hear of superintendents who are managing SUs and they're going to board meetings every week. And, they're not able to be the instructional leader that I'm sure they want to be as a result of that. And it, in some ways, it does get in the way of your ability to set out a unified, intentional, comprehensive, thoughtful vision and actually have the time to do that in a way that is, meticulous and thoughtful, and lay out that, 3, 5, 10-year strategic plan, and really have the time and bandwidth and capacity to use and leverage the resources you have in the best ways possible in order to achieve that vision and that strategic plan. So I think that is a really big challenge when we're talking about SUs. And, I'm sure Christine would have something to say about that too.
I can comment on being the superintendent in a supervisory union. And I'm very fortunate to work in a very supportive supervisory union where our 4 boards collaborate regularly, and we have coordinated a lot of the things mentioned, our IT and our transportation and our central office staff and our curriculum. And under Act 46, 2 of our districts merged. So West Windsor and Windsor merged into the Mount Escutney School District and saw considerable savings doing that. My 2 other districts, Heartland and Wethersfield, they value choice and they pay for it. So it costs a lot of money to have school choice. I think they're getting to the point where conversations are happening. It's really expensive. And so the community has to decide when the time is right to change that. But I will say that the budget seasons for those 2 districts, well, for all districts, have been very challenging. But I had a failed budget in Weathersfield this year, and the only place we can cut is our K-8 budget. And so our K-8 kids are suffering due to that. So there are a lot of efficiencies to being in an SD, I imagine. I'm not in one, but I hear from other superintendents who are. Thanks.
Ma'am?
Hi, my name's Shelley Andrews. I'm a Quechee taxpayer and also a grandmother. My granddaughter goes to the Ottaquechee School, and she's also in an IEP. And there's a lot of things I know you said about doing cuts with IEPs and special education. We can't do cuts. We really can't. If we did something different, that would be effective for the children. And one of the things for my granddaughter, she was traumatized. And number one, get rid of the rubber rooms. I'm sorry, the wolf den. Those are not appropriate, you know. Thank you. Especially for trauma victims. That is not the way to go. And you don't groom the kids for 4 years to go in a rubber room. That's not okay. Second of all, you're dealing with behavioral issues. And there are other resources out there. And I'm not sure if any one of you guys have heard of We Are Hope. Has anybody heard of We Are Hope? You use them? Thank you. We Are Hope is a tremendous, wonderful program. My granddaughter was in kindergarten, and she got taken a year early because of the trauma that she had experienced. She got taken in a year earlier. So right after kindergarten, instead of right after first grade, they were going to try her. The first day when I left her alone, she was scared, but one of the aides or one of the teachers came over and embraced her, engaged her, you know, said my name, you know, my name's Matt. And she goes, well, that's my dad's name. That was all it took. And I was able to leave her there. I came back that night and picked her up. She was all smiles and happy and giddy and everything. And I'm like, oh my God, this was a transformed kid in one day. And I says, what happened? And she said, Grammy, she says, it's okay to be different. I learned that today. And that was incredible. And I have brought her for the last 3 years. She's going to be going again this year. But if you guys engage them, get We Are Hope. You're going to save money in the end, because these kids that are traumatized, that have behavioral issues, they were great coaches for people, for adults, for children. I'm telling you, spend a little bit of money, you're going to save money in the end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Chittenden, previous education reforms in Vermont have had unintended consequences. What safeguards are built into, and I know this is early in the process of 220, that would prevent mistakes that could harm students or destabilize districts?
Yeah, great question. I want to stress and emphasize that as the options were looked at to address the very real pressures we're feeling in Vermont, this has the least amount of new policy to consider for our school districts. And that being said, the important thing that I tried to highlight in my opening remarks.
Tom, hold on one second. We're just trying to get the audio correct. Got to turn my mic on. There we go. Go ahead, Tom.
Great. I'm not sure what you heard or not, so maybe I'll start over. I want to say to S220, as we dove into it over the past month and a half, what was important and why I ultimately support this approach is it poses the least amount of new variables to our school districts. This is an existing construct, which, yes, we are contemplating lowering the threshold, but we added to it 4 additional important caveats and sensible policies that should make this, to your question, be less of a shock or a unmanageable adjustment to how we approach budgeting. Those that are familiar with this process will know that in order to adjust for your education spending per pupil, you can draw down from reserves, and you can also, with the contemplated changes, any capital investments that are approved by local voters would be excluded from the threshold. So that too gives them options as well. So I just want to stress that this is, I would argue, the soft approach, which is sensible in the fact that it's known to all of the school districts, and they would have the choice to actually ask the voters to approve higher spending amounts. So I don't know, other than the safeguards that are listed to start with, those 4, including the appeal process, I believe those are a good starting point to continue this conversation in the House. And I think it's important to recognize that there's never going to be a perfect policy or bill. This is just part of the conversation that is, I think, demanded of us. I also want to recognize Secretary Saunders had her hand up a moment or two ago, and she might have a comment on either this question or the prior commentary.
Thank you, Secretary Saunders.
I just had a comment related to the question around the supervisory union versus supervisory district. The administration has been really consistent in recommending a supervisory district for the reasons around it being a more efficient structure, and ultimately that you're able to have more aligned and coherent instructional framework. You're able to provide consistent training across all your teachers. You're able to actually when there's a need to share or pool resources, you're able to do that more effectively for the benefit of students. So just wanted to name that that's been a consistent position of the administration, knowing the benefits of a supervisory district, and also recognizing that when we look at supervisory districts, we also have to think about scale and the ability for us to have those dollars go further to support the needs of students. We've been talking in this conversation around the needs of our students with an IEP. And I wanted to note that Act 173 was put into place back in 2018. And all of the same findings at that time are still consistent today, in that we still have a disproportionate number of students that are in a separate setting, that we're missing that opportunity to provide a more robust continuum of services for our students, and that we still lack a consistent quality tier 1 instruction in every classroom. And so we need to make sure that we're not just examining the challenges, but we're really focused on making the shifts that are needed in order to provide a better quality educational experience for all students. And so being able to operate at scale is part of that. We do see that our larger supervisory districts are able to develop those continuum of services and be able to better meet the needs of their students with IEPs than other systems that tend to be more fragmented or are paying more and more for costly services, as opposed to building their core team that really knows and understands the needs of their students. So I think in all of these conversations, it's important to note, that we do need to think about scale. We need to think about funding, but all of these conversations are centered on what we're hoping to achieve for our students. And I think it's important to reflect that we've continued to have these persistent gaps in terms of our ability to deliver on our promise for students, and that we talk a lot about how there is a sense of urgency. There's a sense of urgency for us to address these gaps. Moving to larger districts is a strategy that will help us to ensure that those dollars go further. The idea that the regional services are quicker to stand up hasn't been proven out in practice, and can create another layer of bureaucracy. So I think we need to make sure we're also very practical in how we're approaching this conversation. I think it was noted that there could be a potential of just requiring all districts to spend more. There comes the question of where do the dollars come from? So if we kept our current funding system and every single community took advantage of the property tax capacity, we would be spending hundreds and millions of dollars more. And there may not be the return because you're not able to still deliver on those programming if you're not operating at scale. So just, was responding to the specific question around governance and just positioning that, yes, there is a preferred structure, and that's because we can better align our resources, provide a coherent instructional experience, provide more support for our students and teachers, and make sure that our central offices at the district really have the expertise that's needed to support our teachers and to coordinate programming and services across schools.
Thank you, Secretary Saunders. Representative Holcomb, you had a comment?
Just two quick points. We know that supervisory districts are more efficient operating governance units. The reason we have SUs is some districts pay tuition and some districts operate. And you cannot have a district where some kids don't have the option of taking their tuition or their voucher where they go, and other kids do. You have to have one way of providing education to all the kids within your system. So until Vermont is willing to tackle and take on that issue, we are going to have SUs, and that's been part of the challenge. The solution that the administration came was to initial proposal was 5 very large districts that would have had statewide school choice or choice within each of those districts. That's something that didn't fly. Most kids aren't in that kind of system, and they really want their community schools. And that's partly why we're in this point right now, trying to figure out how to negotiate that. On the issue of learning and special ed and making sure kids have good opportunities, you actually have to do the work. Back when that bill was passed, shortly after Dan French took office, he fired the person, the deputy who'd been in charge of developing the implementation plan around improving instruction and providing support to struggling learners. He took the money that was allocated for that and put it on other purposes, and that work was never done. That was our big state initiative to improve teaching and learning, and we didn't do it. That's why our outcomes are the same now as they were in 2018. And I say that because as a state, we have an implementation problem. Teaching doesn't get better if you don't focus on improving teaching. And when I went into education in Vermont 100 years ago, I earned these gray hairs, we had incredible support from the state around teaching and learning. Anyone who's been around long enough and you remember the Portfolio Project, we were nationally known for our work around professional development, and that's why we had amazing outcomes. And because it was run out of the state, every single superintendent didn't have to do it locally because they had top quality professional development for everybody coming out of the state. We don't do that. We haven't done that since 2008. And that's a choice. But if you want scale, there's some great opportunities here. As it is, I don't even think we have a state director of special education, and we haven't been able to hold on to them. So when you look at the challenging outcomes, it's because we don't have consistent leadership and support to make sure that our districts can do the best they should do and can do for our kids.
Heather?
And when you said he, I don't even know if people knew who you're talking about.
Dan.
You hear me? Oh, there. Heather Chase from Chester. Very complex issue, learning a lot, still learning a lot. I do think we have to simplify things for voters and for people who live in the state. People don't understand why their school budget went down and their taxes went up. People don't have time to dive down deep into the minutia like we're doing tonight. We need a solution, but we also need transparency because people want to understand and they want to everyone wants to support education and have the magical moments, but we have to convey what's going on to people, and we aren't doing a good job of that. And so I just ask that we keep that in mind, because when people do understand the mechanism of why they're being taxed over here, one amount over here, another one, it's very complex. But when they understand, then they trust. And when they don't understand, they don't trust, and they don't vote for their school budgets. And I just like it to be simplified enough so it's transparent, so most people within an hour or two could understand it, versus having to get your PhD in how we fund education. Thank you.
Representative Cole?
Thank you, Heather. It's good to see you. Good to see everyone. And thank you so much for being here and showing up. This is obviously so critically important. The simplicity piece is a complex one, right? And the reason it's so complex is because we lean so heavily on property taxes to fund education. And in doing so, trying to be the kind legislators that we are, we've tried to implement sort of breaks based on income sensitivity to act or make the property tax act more like an income tax, basically, which is more like progressive and in line with what people actually earn. But it's no matter how hard you try to do that, no matter how many complicated, intervals and integration and variables you stick in there to try to make it even out, there's still massive, massive cliffs. So if you earn $1 more in income and you're in the same property or whatever, you're going to have like a 10,000 increase in your property tax bill just because of that cliff there, because you were on the cutoff. And so my biggest problem with all of this is really the inequities in how we're burdening taxpayers, not based on wealth, overall wealth, and how much you actually have, but really just based on this, what I think is an antiquated system. I get why we are still leaning so heavily on property taxes. I think there is a belief that it's more stable than income, but I have seen tons of great research that actually is kind of a myth. And tax flight too is a myth. The people who are experiencing tax play right now is this middle tier who is being so heavily burdened by property taxes, so it's not the top tier that is running away. And so I think these are all contorted myths that we really need to debunk. And I think in doing so, that would help with the simplicity to get to Heather's question of like, why am I paying so much when I really can't afford to right now? And I think if we had a simpler equation that didn't lean so heavily on property taxes, but maybe was supplemented by property taxes and what type of property you're in, I think I'm grateful for the teeny tiny step that, Act 76 implemented in its legislation to, change the bracket of what a non-residential house basically would be taxed. But my gosh, it is so late in the game for that. And I'm concerned that I don't, to get political, I'm really concerned that that's not a priority of this administration. Like it's actually kind of like a hard line of this administration to not tax differentially based on what kind of property you live in. And that's just sort of in legislative negotiations, this is what I am understanding. And it's really hard to hear. So better taxing based on wealth and what people actually have is something I care deeply about. And I think that could make our equation much more simpler. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. Sir?
Hello, Mike Cannon, Hartford resident and father of children in the district. We do hear a lot about, it seems like it could be a bookend to a lot of this conversation, is healthcare. And what my question, since we have all these people here that can talk on the subject, is what would that even look like if it were decoupled? And is there something like we could all learn about any efforts to alleviate that specific thing, and what would that even look like?
Do you want to take that?
I can take a swing, or you can. Go ahead. I've talked a lot.
I'm happy to be the healthcare person. Hi, my name is Becca White, and I have been on this stage many a time under these lights because I am a graduate of Hartford High School. So yeah, public, yeah.
Oh, come on. You got to give a
Yeah, come on, the Hurricanes, woo! Okay, yeah. I know I was on debate team and we won states then, but we weren't the state hockey champs or the state basketball champs, so I get it. So to the healthcare question, I'll just tell you about a little bit of work that we're doing this year, where if you're thinking you want to advocate related to healthcare cost reductions, this would be where I'd spend your time. The first is we're implementing something called reference-based pricing. Reference-based pricing is a negotiation tool with providers so that you start at the rate that Medicare pays. That's your negotiation rate, essentially. And at that point, the provider has to start at a lower rate for the most part. So if you're getting a service, the starting negotiation rate for state insurance will be using reference-based pricing. So we're hoping to see some reductions due to that bill that we passed last year that's being implemented now. So if you're following that, I would say continue to advocate for that. We're also working on some universal primary care legislation that just passed in the Senate. And I should point out, we have our Senate Majority Leader here who was a big part of that work. So thank you, Keisha Ram Hinsdale. Thank you for driving to Hartford. Yeah. and she's got her daughter with her, so your adorable kids could meet up after. And then the last thing I would note is we do have a regulatory authority, the Green Mountain Care Board, that something that Representative Cole, I was really impressed with last year. She introduced a bill related to CEO pay, and in particular, the increased the concerning difference between salary. I don't know where that landed, but there is a lot of work that we could do to regulate our hospitals and in particular their spending. And I would look first towards executive level folks for reduction. So that would be my healthcare suggestions.
Yep.
Here, there's some good news here. We worked very hard to stop price gouging around pharmaceuticals. And just to give you an example of how effective we were, and I'm going to brag about this because this is good. We have somebody here from Dresden. They were telling me that on the Vermont side of the river, teacher healthcare only went up about 7%. On the New Hampshire side, it went up 26%. And part of that was the work that we had done to restrict growth in pharmaceutical prices. So we're going to keep going. We're still working on that one, and that's really important. And give us a shout out. And thanks to all the people who helped inform that. The reference-based pricing is super important. It sounds complicated, but it actually is tied to, interestingly, the governor's strategy for healthcare is regional shared services. Does that sound familiar, anyone? Doesn't like it for education, loves it for healthcare. And here's why it works. And what we're finding in the reference-based pricing process is that some procedures, like it costs twice as much to get a certain procedure at UVM Medical Center as it does at Copley or at Gifford. So part of it is figuring out what these procedures would cost and trying to move people where possible to get the care they need, but at the most affordable price. And that's a lot of that work. And the regional shared services is hospitals saying, hey, everybody can't, we aren't big enough. We can't afford a fully staffed, orthopedic center at every single hospital. So we either need to share those specialized staff or we need to coordinate so that we have enough of that service in the state, but we don't have that service everywhere in the state. We can't afford it. That's what we're trying to encourage in education as well. We don't have to all do everything. There are ways to work regionally to make sure people get the care they need at the price they can afford when they need it. And that has to be the goal. We're small, we can't do everything, but we can do really, really well. And we're going to.
Representative Cole.
Sure. I mean, these fabulous ladies, I think, really teed it up super well and explained mostly everything we need to know. But just for reference too, so you can look back later into the details if you're curious. So the reference-based pricing bill, that was Act 68 of 2025. So this is all really, really recent. I mean, I wish this had happened a long time ago, but I'm so glad that something is finally moving, and I do think this will have a substantial impact. And just piggybacking on what was already said too, this would move the healthcare model in our hospitals away from a fee-for-service sort of model to a global budget system. And I think part of the beauty in this is not only in sheer cost savings, but because there would be caps, but that take into account disparities by region and by need and by access to care, basically in rural settings or urban settings. But a beautiful part of this is that we're not going to lean so heavily into more expensive procedures in order to keep a hospital afloat. Like that's that fee for service piece. Whereas global budgets, you might have greater incentive to invest more in primary care. Which is kind of a beautiful thing for health outcomes too. And at least that's what the research shows. So I'm really curious and hopeful, I think, for how this will play out. And then the other piece too, which is really important and was a really hard one to move forward, is that cap on outpatient prescription drug pricing. And at UVM Medical Center was charging upwards of 1,000 times the market rate for like an ibuprofen. Not even kidding, because that's where they would come up with their profit margins to have a profit. It's a nonprofit, but it's not a nonprofit. So yeah, I mean, that's a huge deal. And in numbers, just since implementation, which was literally this year because this passed in 2025, we have saved $230 million on just this one piece. And that's not to say that it's hard, because hospitals have been functioning with this methodology for a while now, and it's kind of getting a little bit worse than it had been in recent history. But we'll see what comes of this. But that's just the start. But we need fast action because obviously healthcare is so unaffordable right now. But baby steps, I guess.
Thank you, Representative Cole. Just to give you an idea of the difference from UVM Medical Center and Springfield, for instance. An MRI at UVM Medical Center, $7,800. Springfield, $1,800. Yes.
Oh, hi. Hi, Erica Fallon, mother of many dragons in all stages of their Vermont education, from freshman in college in Vermont all the way down to a third grader. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to ask about our favorite question right now, PCBs. What's going on? I want to know what's going on with H542 that is out. And also, the last time the legislative made a big decision for our schools, it was the mother of all unfunded mandates. So I don't have a lot of faith right now that anything that's coming down is going to be implemented in the way that you think it might be implemented, because we're currently in a room right now that we can't upgrade because there's no guidance and there's no money for something we were told we had to do. So my question is, what's going on?
So I haven't called on Representative Christie, and he has been both on the Hartford School Board as well as he is in Montpelier. So I'm going to ask you if you can handle this question.
Let's try that. To respond to your question, initially, the funds were available to a number of schools that came on board with the initial testing. As the process went forward over the last couple of years, it became apparent that money had to be put into that fund in order to support the schools that already had been tested, let alone looking at the other schools that were built around the same period of time. Because as we know, it's a construction-based problem. And if you look at schools built around that same period, that's where we're experiencing, the heavier concentration, of PCBs. So that being said, the legislature is going to have to take a stand and put, as you said, our money where our mouth is, and support those schools that have already been, into the process, to help them remediate the problem itself. And that's just a straight up answer to the problem itself. And there's always that question of unfunded mandates, and that's gone on for as long as, I think we've all been around education in any way. And as Representative Holcomb mentioned about process and making sure that, we do what we say we're going to do is mission critical, and that can be emphasized in a number of different ways with a number of the topics that we covered today. And just thinking about Mr. Ferriel and the comment, that he made about where the magic happens, that's true about special ed as well. And the old funding formulas that we had used over time, along with the guidance of the agency at the time helped Vermont be one of the best providers of special ed in the country, because we had supports for our frontline teachers and administrators in that area of special ed, as well as other teaching specialties. And, you know, like Representative Holcomb mentioned, those of us that have been around for a while, you know, do recall those times. You know, I remember as a classroom teacher being able to call the agency and speak to a specialist in my area of education and get a response and guidance as to how I could be a better teacher. And without those supports, you know, we're not doing justice, you know, to our kids at the other end. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Representative Holcomb.
Thank you, Coach. I always appreciate you bringing it back to the kids. And 542, I mean, I think you have a problem here. And 542 is currently in the Senate. House has passed it. And we're hoping that that will push a pause on some of the new testing. And we are working to try to figure out how to handle construction aid, because frankly, we can't fix this without construction aid. And part of the challenge of not fixing the weights and doing what we're doing with S20 is what we're losing is an opportunity to try to figure out how to target the resources we do have towards that construction aid. I'm excited by some of the conversations going on in the House right now around regional high schools. There are places that really do need to take some buildings offline. We actually, as a state, we actually cannot afford to rebuild every high school. So I think there are meaningful conversations going on about where it makes sense to look at regional collaboration, reduce the total number of buildings, and then prioritize the resources and the construction aid towards those sites. So hopefully we'll have good news for you about funding and a path forward. Just as a general policy, it's bad policy to turn up a problem with no plan for how to solve it.
And just this whole conversation feels like we're going in that direction. Just the education conversation in general, like we are making a lot of assumptions and we don't really have like a plan. Like we're throwing a lot of things into a basket and we're hoping it comes out. Same with like, it's a good idea. It looks good on paper. Let's test all these schools, but we don't have the money to actually, in general, like when you're making these policies, it's affecting people in a real concrete. Like my kids perform in this theater. We had to limit the amount of tickets we sold to watch our kids perform.
Absolutely.
It's every day.
And we had people in one district who spent almost 2 months outside at the beginning of the year. That disrupts learning. What you're talking about disrupts learning. It is a real problem, and we have a responsibility to address it and not leave districts hanging.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Please, Superintendent Sutton, and actually I want to hear from all three superintendents. And the reason I want to, because you're having to deal with this day to day. So it's important that you express this as well.
Thank you. Yeah, one point I want to make, just like the SU-SD conversation, you're talking about, you know, superintendent serving as instructional leader and providing a vision. I have to say that this whole PCB topic it's a lot of time that we're spending on this, and it's not fair to our students that so many of us are working on this problem right now that we didn't create. So I beg the legislators to work on this and to make it right for our community. This is not fair that we're in this position, and it's diverting our attention significantly away from the reason we're here, which is to serve kids. And one other thing I just want to add, because I think it's important. And we have a lot of Hartford residents here, a lot of people who send their kids to our school, our schools. One thing that Senator Chittenden said in relation to S220 is that this would be a soft approach. And then the secretary talked about it being a bridge to a foundation formula. One thing I just want to be really clear about is, number one, I want to clarify that our bond and our debt service is not a part of our per pupil spending right now. We passed that before that change was made. So I want to be clear that we're not going to benefit from that at all. Furthermore, when I look at the modeling right now, if S220 were to go into effect next year, we would have to decrease our per pupil spending by over $1,300, which is something like $1.7 million, which I have no idea where that would come from. So I just want to be clear about what is being deemed a soft cost. It would not be here in Hartford at all.
Build on that. And if we did still decide to fund our schools in the same way we do now, we would receive double taxation as a community on the amount of money that we've chosen to spend.
Correct.
Just a couple points of clarity. I think that we too, Mountain Views, I think our hit is 7.5 million. I hear about tier 1 instruction. I hear about having expertise and access to this. Quality tier 1 instruction, it takes dedicated teachers who are well funded, strong professional development, leaders who have the opportunity to be instructional leaders. It costs money. And so on one hand, we're talking about all these things we aspire to, and then we have the hammer of decreasing to 112%. Those two things cannot coexist. We cannot have the high quality. If we had the supports in place previously, where I too could call AOE, and I had an expert in special education services, I had all kinds of resources. We as Southeast Superintendent said enough, and we collaborated and we created the Vermont Learning Collaborative. It is not, and I really need to correct this, this is not another level of governance. This is a way for us as superintendents to work together to identify needs, whether it's special education, cost sharing, professional development, in ways that we've not, and I can say this because I have one more year, that AOE no longer provides for us. And I say that as an educator in Vermont for over 30 years, as a special educator who worked really hard to develop programs that allowed our students to remain in our community. The District 1000, we have one student in an alternative day program because we have high quality programs as close to our home schools as we possibly can. It's doable. It's not cheap because it's the right thing to do for our students. So I really need to verify, and there are other superintendents who would love to start collaboratives. We are working, and Christine is the president of the association. She's worked alongside, as well as the other superintendents. We want to share that information. They are poised, but their superintendents are getting the information that I just heard tonight, that it's another level of governance, and it is not. It's getting superintendents and educators the resources they need today to have the high quality tier 1, tier 2 intervention and the kind of special ed services our students deserve.
Secretary Saunders, it would be remiss of me for you not to respond to that.
Sorry, I had the wrong button. The proposal around moving towards a CISA is what I would argue is another layer of governance. And it comes down to how we are going to invest our dollars, right? There are things that larger districts are able to do in terms of pooling their resources without creating another layer of governance on top of an already very complicated governance structure, which is fragmented and diverting dollars to students. When we talk about moving towards regional services, the Agency of Education and the administration have supported regional service delivery. It is false to say we haven't. But what we've talked about is how to do that strategically. Where are regional service delivery, where is that needed? And then where can that be served through larger districts? The governor's original proposal that came forward with 5 districts also included regional service entities, because we recognize that given our small state and that there needing to be really specialized services, our state can benefit from regional services. The point is that some of these regional services are going to be built on top of districts that are already financially struggling and are not viable and are not sustainable long-term. So it's creating additional cost and complexity to a system that's already overly complex for the number of students that we serve. It ends up being a very top-heavy system where we need to make sure, again, if our budget is an expression of our priorities, we have to ensure that those dollars are going to our students and are able to realign to investing in our teachers and the teacher support that is needed. I want to acknowledge that in all of this conversation today, while there is debate around many of the details, we all have consensus on a large part of the puzzle here. We all recognize that we need to move into a system that is more fair, that is more equitable, both to our students and to our teachers. We recognize that given the complexity and the size of our state, there is a need to pool our resources. In some cases, that can be achieved through larger districts in many cases. And in other cases, there may need to be regional service delivery, even when you have large districts. What we're talking about is how do we get to this path forward in a way that will create a strong and aligned system. Over the last 20 years, the state has enacted a number of policies that divert responsibilities that are typically held at the state down to the local level. And while that was designed to really empower local communities, it has created tremendous burden. And for those districts or SUs that are under-resourced or spread thin, they're not able to deliver on all of those education expectations that have been put into law, and then they become unfunded mandates. What we're talking about is transforming our entire system so that we're delivering that differently. And when we think about the system, there's a number of layers of responsibility and accountability. And the Agency of Education does have a role. And that's why we have been examining the way that the agency operates. We have been critically reviewing how services are delivered, and we have fundamentally changed the Agency of Education. The Agency of Education that I joined 2 years ago is a very different agency today. We have done a complete reorganization, and that was designed because we recognized that we needed to change in order to help lead the change for the state and to better meet the priorities of the field. What we're describing here today about providing additional training, providing clarity around the support for Tier 1 instruction and multi-tiered systems of support, those are all the things that we are putting into place right now. So we have agreement. We've really looked at the challenges as a state, and we are clear-eyed around what hasn't worked well in the past and where we need to head. The debate that we're having right now is around some of the details and the timing. And what we have advocated for, and I consistently advocate for as secretary, is greater transparency. We need to make sure that we're clear around the outstanding decisions that the legislature has not made yet. The legislature has not made decisions yet around the district configurations. That is an important input. They have not made decisions yet around the final funding formula. But we need to make sure that those decisions are made so that the field has the details that they need to start making the strategic decisions that are necessary to move the entire state forward. So I don't want us to miss the opportunity today to recognize that all of us on this call today, while we might have differences in how we may approach things, do agree largely on the challenges and are very focused on improving the quality of our system, and recognize that as we move forward with this change, that we need to be strategic, we need to be transparent, And this is a time for us all to come together collectively as a state to tackle this issue. And I think really come out of this stronger. And I'm really confident in what inspires me every day to do this job is that I think we're in a very unique position as a state of Vermont to really double down on public education, become the standard for the country around what excellence looks like and how we can really continue to live out our values and the promise that we put forward for students around delivering them a world-class education through our public education system. And I think that that's within reach and that we're having the important conversations, and sometimes they're difficult and challenging conversations, but we're starting with a real understanding of the issues and clarity around where we need to head over the next few years in order to build a more equitable education system that's giving all of our students opportunity, supporting our teachers, and ensuring that we have the right level of expertise at each part of our system. That includes the agency of education, that includes the district, all the way down to the schools and the classroom. So this is really a system realignment. It truly is a transformation and is challenging us to deliver education differently so that we can benefit our students and continue to invest in their futures and the future of Vermont.
Thank you so much, Secretary Saunders. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name's Joshua Lake. I'm a Chester resident and a police officer in Southern Vermont. And I deal with kids every day who are struggling with serious mental health issues. We're talking K through 8 students who have crippling anxiety, severely truant, and unable to function in normal society. And I get concerned because I see these kids slipping through the cracks now, and then I see them going to a high school where they further slip through the cracks, and we often joke, they slip through the cracks right into the back of a police cruiser. I want to know, as we're talking about budget cuts, as we're talking about making changes to our system, how do we make sure that these students at the most pivotal points of their lives are getting the mental health support that they need so they can become contributing members of our society in 10 years? And beyond that, I want to know, how do we help them get into programs after high school, transition into, we say the real world, to become college students or tech students or get into a career field that they're going to benefit from? That's my questions. And just thank you all for everything you do. I always say teachers they have more of a thankless job than police officers do. At least we get some press releases now and again. So thank you guys.
Superintendent Bourne, can you handle that question?
I can't talk.
No, no, Superintendent Bourne, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Can make an attempt. So mental health supports cost money. And so when we're talking about reducing our budgets, there is a risk that some of those services that are so important to our kids will be reduced. They're hard decisions that have to be made, but it's mental health is now the charge of educators, which it hasn't been in the past. And our educators do an incredible job supporting our students and our families. And we do our best with what we have, but without the resources, I hate to say it, not all kids will probably get what they need. I don't know if that's the reality, but if you have anything to add.
Oh, there we go. Okay. I'll highlight one positive that's not associated with the education realm specifically, but I've been really impressed by Project Action in Springfield. If anyone is familiar with Project Action down there, it's basically a round table includes some educators, law enforcement, engaged citizens, human services folks. And when they identify a problem, either a family close to being evicted for lack of paying rent, for example, they identify what can we do as a community to prevent and stabilize this family in that situation.
and they pull from all of the different resources at the round table. And that has been extremely effective in Springfield. So I know you said that you're a Southern Vermont police officer, but I do think we need to draw from that potentially in other communities as well, because it pulls in all of our community stakeholders into the conversation. It includes like faith leaders. It's a very dynamic group of people who can project move an issue forward that is facing a specific community member. But that's a positive.
Right. And I think and again, going back, so started in education here in 94. I was a special educator working in the middle school, high school with students with emotional needs. I had strong partners in our designated agencies. And so Woodstock area, we're surrounded. We don't, if you are in Killington, you're Rutland. If you're in Reading, you're having Springfield supports. If you're in Woodford, so we were not owned by anyone, but we had partners everywhere. And their cuts have resulted in our increases. So them not being able to provide, not being able to fill positions, not being able to pay a salary that was livable for many of the therapists that were working in HCRS and other support agencies, those resources that were really tapped into. And we could say, we're about reading, writing, and math, and we're going to create a relationship. And when you needed more than, we could reach out to our designated agency. Those designated agencies have had significant cuts. And as a result, our counseling, our therapeutic supports in our public schools has significantly increased. The need doesn't go away. And we have to, and I've been told by designated agencies, well, you're mandated to provide services. We're not. Well, we have students that come every day and they have needs, and some of them are counseling, and some of them are very intense needs that typically would not be served within a school walls. They become our responsibility because they're our kids and they're a part of our families and our communities. And I think Rebecca can speak.
I just wanted to give some numbers because this is real numbers. I mean, just the last year, I think we had about $100 million increase in total school spending. About 50 million of that was related to mental health, student mental health. It is real. And on average, when you look at the F33, the federal collection, on average, Vermont schools spend about $2,000 more per child on student support services, which includes mental health. So one of the things that makes us different and makes us more expensive is that our schools in many of our communities are actually the safety net of last resort. There are no social services for those kids if they aren't getting it through their school. That's not the same in all states. And that is just something to be in mind when you make state to state comparisons.
Superintendent Sutton, did you have something to add?
I was going to say the same thing that Representative Holcomb said, that yes, there's been a huge decrease in designated agencies, and schools have incurred those costs more and more and more and more, and the need has just grown and grown and grown and grown. And so we're absorbing those costs. And there are a lot of different states out there who have really robust departments of health that include mental health services for students. And instead, this has been a cost that we have incurred that has grown exponentially, particularly since the pandemic.
Thank you. Representative Elizabeth Burrows.
Hello. Oh, hi. For full disclosure, I am Representative Elizabeth Burrows. I represent Windsor 1, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor. I also serve on the Mount Escutney School Board and the Windsor Southeast Supervisory Union Board. And I would add to that one of the outcomes of that is increased hazing, harassment, and bullying, which tends to go unaddressed in our system at any level and will not get better with forced consolidation at all. Like, not just because of the distance to accountability, but also if districts are forced to merge together. But that's not my question. My question is actually a question for Senator Chittenden. In the conversations about S220, did you consider holding harmless parts of the education budget over which districts have no control? Did you consider having and excess spending cap actually represent education spending over which districts have control? And if not, why not? Thank you.
Thank you. I believe we did. The original, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So the original construct that was presented in the underlying bill was a hard spending cap based on education spending, which adjusted for the offsetting revenues, which is a lot of the things that the district doesn't have control over: legal settlements, special education financing, any other local revenues. So if they get impact fees or otherwise. So the original construct did do that, but that amount was quite volatile, and you were comparing within the district, the education spending from one year to the next, which a lot of that using the sliding scale is not necessarily comparing that spending relative to the entire education fund, the whole state, which the existing construct, the excess spending threshold, does. So to your other point, bonded debt is something that districts don't have control over. Our current law only excludes debt that was approved prior to January 1st, 2024. So this S220 contemplated amendment would in fact exclude all bonded debt, voter approved bonded debt, which voters don't have any control over. As for slicing out other aspects that the school districts don't have any control over, that's certainly worth continued merit. And as you would know, Representative Burrows, that this process has a second half to this. This was before crossover, so this conversation can certainly continue into the House, where the further exclusions could also be considered. I just want to state that this was, in my mind, and still is, the least disruptive path forward to apply a centralized budgetary guidance while still allowing districts to choose, should they so desire, to spend above this threshold amount. It is a lot less punitive and fixed than what the foundation formula contemplates. Now, to be clear, I'm going to just elaborate a little bit. For those of you that know, I did not vote for Act 73. I do support the consolidation discussion, similar to what many of the panelists in the room have talked about. I think that's where we can achieve greater equity at a more reasonable price, while also giving kids greater access to educational resources by looking at our governance structures. And that includes this very important consolidation to school districts. And I understand the districts and union trade-offs, but I have serious reservations about the foundation formula and the trajectory of it. And so that's why I could not support it. But I want you to know that that foundation formula, if it goes into effect, it would effectively be a harsh cap where voters would not be able to, for all intents and purposes, vote or spend above that amount. I know there's a 5% caveat, but that's in a way sort of to be phased out over time. So you would be taking away the voting say that you currently have with the current excess spending threshold and as contemplated here. So as much as there are concerns that this will, in fact, apply some downward pressure on spending in order to achieve greater consistency across our districts and less variance, it is a lot less restrictive than what's contemplated in the foundation formula. And I did hear Secretary Saunders, who I respect, said that this could be seen and used as a bridge to the foundation formula. I did not present it that way on the floor or here tonight. I see this as a modest step forward to look at ways to control spending in our system, which has fewer and fewer kids that we're spending more and more money on. And I know it's about the kids. It's absolutely about the kids. I think we can serve the kids better if we think about governance and how we deliver those services in the facilities that we're serving them in. And I see S220, this conversation about an existing tool, as a way to continue these important conversations by trying to meet the needs of our kids in ways that Vermont collectively can afford, because this is a statewide education fund. I just want to say Secretary Saunders had her hand up again. I noticed it, and we didn't call on her. So I certainly would welcome her reaction to the comments I just made.
You're shaking your head no, by the way. But Representative Burrows, you had a follow-up?
Yeah, I did. What I was talking about, Senator Chittenden, is things like healthcare, over which we have no control. And for in supervisory unions, districts don't have control over tuitions, so they have to cannibalize their services. In our district, Windsor Southeast, or in Mount Escutney School District, we did not increase spending, and yet our tax rate went up 27% because of costs. We are a fully operating district. We have costs that put us over the excess spending threshold, and we now have to account for hundreds of thousands of dollars With S220, it'll be more than $1 million, which we have to somehow either eat out of our functioning district, or I mean, I think we would have to shutter at least one of our 2 schools, if not, yeah. So it is a sledgehammer for something over which we have no control, and it confuses me why you would cause these districts in this area to have to sacrifice. If you're saying that you are centering children and their well-being and their education, then why would you cause districts to have to cannibalize over things over which they have zero control? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is, yep.
I just want to say it's not me. So you said it's just to me. This is a conversation before the legislature. But I take your points, and I would say, as a former board member on multiple bodies, these are tough decisions. And so I would be welcome to dive deeper into what you're looking at on your school boards to understand where the give and takes may be. And maybe that's, again, if I could give an opening to Secretary Saunders, could she speak about where the AOE can help with these school districts that are struggling? Because a lot of what you just said is what you're struggling with within current state, not with S220 as currently contemplated in effective law. So these are tough conversations that are happening throughout the state. And I get that the construct that's presented in this current amendment of this current version, 2 steps out of 8 steps through the process, is posing a lot of concern for Windsor District schools. And that's why I'm really glad I was here tonight to hear these concerns. So I can certainly take that and keep it top of mind as the conversation continues.
Secretary Saunders, did you want to comment on that?
I just want to remark that in our current system is unfair. So in our current system, our districts are having to cut and cut and cut more programs, more services, cut and cut and cut teachers. And it's being done in a way that is haphazard across the state. And it is disproportionately impacting our lower income, higher needs communities. So our current system is not fair. And I think there's agreement on that among the panelists, which is why there is a bipartisan effort for Act 73 to move to a new system. The foundation formula is the way for us to move into a place where we will be more equitable and ensuring that students that have the same needs get the same resources, and ensuring that we have a way statewide to pay for that so that it is fair. The conversations that you all are debating right now in the legislature around S220, I would see as a bridge. It is a bridge to getting to a better state where we're moving into larger districts who are able to benefit from some of the significant funding that we're putting forward in Act 73 to deliver programming more holistically for all students. Because right now that's not happening. We see tremendous variability district by district in terms of the programming that's offered. And even if a district is going to hold their budget steady or decrease their budget, their taxes could still go up because of decisions that are made in other communities across the state. So I think there's real clarity that our current system is not fair. It is no longer serving us well, and it's producing great disparity between the have and the have-nots, and it's creating an impossible situation for our local school boards and our local districts, because the only option in front of them is to cut more and more programs, more and more services. And even though those cuts are being made, the cost of education continues to increase. That's fundamentally why we need to examine how we're delivering education and transforming our system in a way so that the significant dollars we're investing in education are actually producing the opportunities that we want for our students. It's translating in to better outcomes and is really creating a world-class system. So I think a lot of what we're talking about this evening are addressing some of the challenges that are currently in our system and have been persistently in our system for a long time, and are underlying why we need to make these changes. And I just, since I do have the floor, I do want to thank everyone for being here. I think I really appreciate our superintendents for being and the panel tonight and providing their perspective. They are here to support our children. They are working with their school boards. But what we're talking about statewide is that we have a systems challenge, and it's the responsibility of the state to ensure that we can deliver a substantially equal education to all students. And that currently is not happening. But I do implore us to continue to be in dialogue. I think we can build upon a lot of the agreement and consensus that we've shared this evening to move forward in a way that is really smart policy and is also thoughtful around what the implementation needs to look like, and to create an evaluation process with that implementation, because the type of change that we're talking about is pretty substantial. And so there may be unintended outcomes as we move forward. We have to be disciplined in implementing with fidelity and with discipline. And then if we're not meeting the intended outcomes, we have to be committed to doing mid-course corrections as needed to make sure that we're all collectively working together to achieve better opportunities for our students.
Thank you, Secretary Saunders. Now I have 5 minutes and 3 questions. So I got to do my job. So please.
I'll make it quick. Thank you, Senator. My name is Michael Livingston. I'm on the school board in Sharon, Vermont. I'm a lifelong educator in the greater Upper Valley. My comment quickly is that given the enormity and complexity of the issues facing us, it's my sincere hope that we don't get sidetracked by disparaging supervisory unions as opposed to and compared to supervisory districts. I'm a member of the White River Valley Supervisory Union Board. There are 30 members on that board, and I can tell you of all the boards I've been part of and I'm currently part of, it is a highly functioning unit that is all on the same page. We have coordinated professional development, consistent curriculum instruction across English language arts, behavior, mathematics. The superintendent is actually an instructional leader known in all of our schools to students, faculty, staff, and parents. We have common interests and support with transportation, data collection and dissemination, finances, business, and food service. So I work in a supervisory union that really could be a model for anyone in the state. I invite you to come, but I do not see supervisory unions insisting or mandating that SDs convert. I would ask that supervisory district personnel respect the work in supervisory unions. And finally, I might add, all things being equal, let's not forget 2 things. Supervisory unions are consistently spending less than SDs across the state, 1. And finally, and I think most importantly, local voice matters to our communities. Of central importance to Vermonters is their ability to speak. It's called democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Don't know if this is working. Sorry. Danielle from Sharon, Vermont as well. Just wanted to express my opinion on it, kind of following up. I also am Sharon resident most of my life, came to Hartford graduate, have Hartford students here now. I do not agree with the fact that I don't want my kids to be forced to going to South Royalton. I feel like we have more academic choices here in Hartford. I feel like extracurricular activities are more here than there are in South Royalton. So I don't want to be forced to do that. And so I feel like it would harm Hartford to have to do these changes. Sorry, I'm not a public speaker, so nerves are getting me here. Sorry. I feel like this is going to be more harm to Hartford to take these children away from here, because what's going to happen now is we're going to have to cut teachers here. And that means obviously it's going to take money away from here, saving money for them in Hartford. Yes, but then again, we're going to take all these funds in turn and put them into South Royalton instead. And when we put them into South Royalton, now we not only have to expand by hiring teachers, but we also have to put more extracurricular activities for these students to make that fair, as well as all of the other programs that are going to need to be taken on by all the additional children who will need to be added. But now we're going to need to expand the school to house all these other children that are coming in. And this is not just for speaking for South Royalton taking on the students from Sharon. This is also Heartland for Windsor and all the other schools that are surrounding. I chose to live in Sharon and I bought a house in Sharon in 2009 because I wanted choice for school for my children. And I've chosen Hartford. I went to Hartford because my parents chose it for me, and I want it to continue, and I don't want to be forced to make this decision. And my children would like the same thing to do for their children in the future because they'd like to stay in Sharon as well. So I just want to express, not impressed, don't want to go forward with it.
Thank you so much. I apologize. You have 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll make it quick.
All right.
Cindy Salazar, I live in Hartford, White River Junction. I've been a parent leadership for 2 generations of kids that I've raised, my grandson and my son. And I've heard the word equitable, equitable, equitable over and over and over again. And I see in this map where the largest number of students is in the Northwest or the Champlain Valley region, 34,000. And the smallest is 10,000. I don't see that as equitable. So I don't agree with the consolidation plan as it's currently written. And I would like to see more work done on it.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank the panelists for coming. I appreciate it. I want to thank the audience, and I want to thank everyone at home. This is an incredibly important topic, and we are still working on it. Your voice matters. So please contact us, contact your school board, contact your legislator, and let's see if we can move this forward. Thank you very much, and have a good night.